Welcome to Stanford Legal, where we look at the cases, questions, conflicts, and legal stories that affect us all every day. I'm Pam Karlan, along with Joe Bankman. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Pam.
So I'm a big musicals fan, and Finian's Rainbow is a great old musical, and it has this song in it that begins, "The Lord made Adam, the Lord made Eve, he made the two of them a bit naive, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They lived as free as the summer breeze, without pajamas and without chemise." And then if you've read the Bible, you know what happens next, right? They eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the next thing they know, they realize they're naked, and they put on clothes. And that's really what our show's going to be about today.
Right. Well, God had a dress code. That's the bottom line. And if you're God and you got a dress code, you got an enforcement mechanism. You can make people feel guilty. But today,
you send them to hell.
There's all sorts of dress codes out there, and they conflict with our desire to, well, let it all hang out.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's interesting is, if all you needed was to stay warm, we wouldn't have the range of clothes we have today. Today, though, we have a guest who's going to talk to us about these dress codes and how they play out and the history of clothing and its relationship to the law, because this is, after all, Stanford Legal. Do you want to introduce Rich?
Yeah, today we've got our good friend and colleague, Rich Ford. Rich is a George E. Osborne Professor of Law at Stanford. Rich writes on discrimination. He writes on local law, but Rich is really a cultural observer, and he's also a sharp dresser.
Yeah, he's what you would call both a scholar and a practitioner of dress.
I like that.
In fact, Rich, I think at one point you were nominated for the Best Dressed Man at Esquire.
The Best Dressed Real Man.
Real man, right?
Real
That's
man.
important.
Yeah.
No, that's right. I submitted the application kind of on a lark, and it turned out I got into the top 25, I think. So.
Well, and you are the best-dressed law professor by far. Although, of course, that's best in breed, not necessarily best in show.
We didn't look at the other 24, but that's as good as we could get our viewers here. And why don't we start off with, tell us a little about what we're trying to convey with dress here. And I want to give you a little bit of a mind teaser here. A lot of people are going to be watching this on Facebook. Other people are going to be listening to it. Take a look at Pam and me, maybe, and tell me what we're trying to get across the way we're dressed.
Okay. Here we go. So, Joe, I'll start with you. It's a preppy outfit, right? Button-down collar, blue blazer. It's professional, but it's also approachable. So I think, you're conveying I'm a serious professional, but I'm also easygoing, unassuming, and an approachable guy, which is very much like you are.
There you go. And it's also like, look Yiddish, think British. How about Pam there?
So, Pam, you look like a professional on a casual day. So, you're not wearing a suit, but you're wearing a nice shirt. But it's the pink scarf that gives me something to work with here. So that pink scarf is your way of dressing up the outfit, right? It's like, I'm not, cleaning out the closets today. I'm not gardening. I'm on a radio show. And so I have a very fetching pink scarf that conveys a little more formality, but without being too formal.
So notice you and Joe have basically the same sort of jacket, but you're wearing a plaid shirt and he's wearing a plain one. Does that signify something?
Oh, it probably does. It probably signifies that I'm a clothes horse. And so I picked out this slightly unconventional check plaid. But in many ways, there's the dress code for professionals in Northern California for sure is a jacket and no tie with the collar open. So we're both right on point.
So one thing that I remember, because you and I have given a couple of talks to Stanford alumni, is you gave a wonderful account of the old sumptuary laws, the kind of first dress codes, and those were a lot more rigid. You would not have had the ability to just kind of choose your clothes.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about those sumptuary laws.
Oh, yeah. It's fascinating. And particularly in the Elizabethan era, they had laws regulating just about every aspect of dress according to your social rank. So, the stereotype is that only the king may wear purple. But actually it was much more elaborate than that. You had laws about who could wear what type of silk, what type of velvet, what colors, who could wear ermine or, fur trim. There were laws about how much fabric could be used to make what were called trunk hose, which are these pants that the people in the Renaissance wore that kind of ballooned out around the thigh. And in fact, one person was arrested for wearing a monstrous pair of trunk hose and brought before the Lord Mayor of London, where his hose were cut and the stuffing pulled out, and he was marched through the streets as a display of public vanity, as an example to others.
And that's right before the Puritan period, where, of course, everybody starts just wearing black and nothing else.
Right. So you have the significance of clothes in the political atmosphere is really important. During the Elizabethan era, it was an era of spectacle, and Queen Elizabeth in particular was very aware of the importance of spectacle in shoring up her power and wanted to make sure that other people didn't usurp her prerogatives. In the Puritan era, they were signifying just the opposite, a sobriety, a seriousness of purpose, and a lack of vanity. The sin of vanity was on people's minds as they dressed down.
So clothes are making a statement, and there's a political aspect to what we wear.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll come back to that later today, the current political aspect. But at the time, this is kind of enforced through the sumptuary laws. Is there a relationship between these laws and kind of political turmoil? In times of turmoil, are these laws, do we see more of them? Do we see less?
I'd say more, and particularly in times not only of turmoil but of social change. So in the late Middle Ages, you had lots of social mobility, you had lots of new technologies. In a way, it was a period a lot like today. So new trade routes are opening up, new economic opportunities, and the result is you've got a lot of people that were in the lower economic or lower social strata that are now making a lot of money all of a sudden. The merchants and the butchers and people like that. And so they are making all this money and they want to dress like it. And so they start dressing like the nobility, and this makes people mad. And the result are these sumptuary laws that are in large part designed to make sure that you can tell someone's social status on sight.
Well, tell us that. We're going from the Elizabethan era now. Take us to the present dress laws and how they conflict with what people want to do. Like, how about laws in the workplace? What's going on there?
Yeah, there are a lot of dress codes. In studying anti-discrimination law, a surprising number of the cases involve a dress code of one kind or another. Lots with regard to gender, where the employer will have a rule that says women have to wear makeup or women have to tease their hair or women have to wear stockings or whatever. And there's a lawsuit challenging that as gender discrimination. There are also some involving race discrimination where the employer bans dreadlocks or all braided hairstyles, and the laws are challenged as race discrimination. But lots and lots of employers have dress codes, some of which are very strict.
Yeah, and one of the most important Supreme Court anti-discrimination cases, a case called Waterhouse against Hawkins, involved a woman who didn't get a promotion, and they said in the kind of critique of her things like you need to dress more in a more feminine way, wear a little more makeup, be a little more deferential. And the Supreme Court ultimately said that treating people in a kind of sex stereotyped way is sex discrimination.
Right. So there are cases in which these laws, they violate the law, and Waterhouse involved this kind of catch-22, which comes up in a lot of these cases where the professional gravitas that someone needs to convey is at odds with the dress code that's making them kind of femme up.
Yeah, this is Stanford Legal, and today we're talking with Rich Ford about dress codes.
So you've got someone trying to, like the Elizabethan nouveau riche, so to speak, someone's trying to break through a ceiling, break through a glass ceiling, And there's a sense that that's threatening, and we want that person to at least look like some stereotype we had in mind.
Yeah, that's a nice parallel. That these dress codes in many cases are trying to make clothing signify something specific. So we want to make sure we know who you are by what you wear. And, a woman who dresses too much like a man is seen as a threat to, the way we think about both groups, in the same way that class strata was threatened by people dressing kind of above their status.
But then if the woman dresses in too feminine a way, too much frills and the like, then she's viewed as not serious.
Right.
So that's what I think you meant by the catch-22.
The catch-22, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first started practicing law, women started wearing these floppy bows with suits, and it looked it always seemed sort of ridiculous to me, but it was the female equivalent of the necktie, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg with her lace collars talked a lot about how, the robe was cut for a man with a tie, and so she wanted to do something different that had, was appropriate for a woman.
Yeah, and she has that special dissent jabot.
Yes, right.
You can tell she's going to read a dissent from the bench if she comes out with a particular lacy thing around her neck.
Right. It's great theater.
Well, we still have a little of this double standard, I think, in our own profession, Pam, because men that are professors almost never get comments about their dress. Maybe Rich does, because he's obviously a snappy dresser who cares. I never do. But from what I understand, it's very common for female professors to get comments one way or the other as students are thinking that they're going too much in one direction.
Yeah, and if you think about it, in schools, that's one of the places where dress codes really have kind of huge purchase. And there are two kinds of them that I wondered if we could talk about them a little bit. One is schools that have school uniforms. What are they trying to do with the school uniforms? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
Yeah, I have some sympathy for the schools in their attempt to try to make clothing less of a thing for the students. And I think with the uniforms, they're really trying to tamp down on kind of class stratification around fashion. Are you wearing the right clothes, the right designer labels? But in some cases, they're also trying to deal with gang type clothing. An easy way to do that is just to say everyone wears a uniform.
Yeah, I think, that was one of the things I was thinking about, is that the uniform does diminish the competition, because everybody's wearing the same thing. But sometimes the uniforms themselves seem to come out of a particular point of view. That is, right? So that the uniforms may be much more comfortable for some of the students than for others of the students in the school, because they seem more like their everyday clothes.
Yeah, though, that's a good point. So the uniforms are often very preppy. So you'll have a charter school, for instance, and it's aspiring toward college prep. And so they have people dress in a kind of a stereotypical preppy way, chinos and a button-down shirt like Joe's shirt. And some people may be more comfortable with that than others, for sure.
This is Stanford Legal, and today we're talking about dress codes with our colleague, Rich Ford.
Well, how about the law here? That is, at the employer level, you can't have a double standard, but I take it you can enforce some kind of conventional standard so long as it doesn't seem directed against a race or a gender. Can you give us an example of what kind of dress codes hold up?
Oh, sure. And in fact, most of the dress codes hold up. So the employer can have a dress code as long as it's applied even-handedly to everyone of just about any kind. You need to show that it's intentionally discriminatory, really. With gender, it's interesting that the employer can have a gender, frankly, discriminatory dress code, one standard for men and one for women, as long as they imposed equal burdens and are not demeaning. And that can encompass a lot of things, like, in fact, making women wear makeup and not men because men have to shave, or women have to wear nylons but men have to wear pants. And courts have, justified divergent dress codes along those lines.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting is that they do have to accommodate religious issues, though. So, for example, they don't have to accommodate gender, but if you are in a religion that requires you to wear a head covering, federal anti-discrimination law says that unless the head covering will be affirmatively dangerous because you're working next to a machine that can grab it or something, the employer has to accommodate that.
That's right. No, that's right. So the exception involves religious accommodations, and those are, there are some instances where the employer can resist, but it's usually an issue of workplace safety. Maybe in some very image-conscious professions, the employer could have a dress code that conflicts with religious dress, but that's right, usually not.
How about transgender issues? I mean, if I come out as transgender and wear a dress, can an employer say I can't do that?
That's now an unsettled area of the law. The EEOC has issued guidelines that protect transgender status, and so under those guidelines, some of which haven't been tested by federal courts, so they're it's not clear. But under those guidelines, a transgender person would have the legal right to dress according to the gender that they identify with, and rather, but. That still doesn't mean that the employer can't have a different dress code for men as opposed to for women. It's just that the transgender person can opt for the dress code that they are comfortable with.
So pushing the envelope a little further, we now also have people who say, I'm non-binary.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these are people who don't say, I'm a woman or a man. They say, I'm something else, or I'm everything.
Yes.
One or the other. And for people who identify as non-binary, how would dress codes apply to them? I mean, are they allowed to sort of say, well, I'll wear a skirt, but I'm going to wear a necktie, or?
It's a really good question, and that's completely unsettled right now. It hasn't been tested. It's not clear whether the employer can have binary dress codes and say you get to pick, but you've got to pick one or the other, or whether that may eventually be seen as discriminatory as well.
How does this relate to kind of customers and kind of the rest of the world? That is, we're talking about courts and people with unusual dress. It doesn't really matter what obviously employer, if they're only in it for the money, care about what customers want and coworkers. How does that relate to all of this?
Well, in practice, the courts are pretty deferential to employers and businesses around dress codes. And so issues of when the employer is an image-conscious employer, they can have a fairly elaborate and fairly exacting dress code. A lot of businesses do. If you look at the rules involving major hotel chains or what have you, they can have very, very strict dress codes. No, customer preference isn't a defense in a discrimination case. So the fact that the customer prefers to see something doesn't excuse the employer from rules that are otherwise discriminatory, but the employer does have pretty broad latitude to have a dress code.
We'll be back with more from Rich Ford about dress codes next on Stanford Legal on Sirius XM Insight 121.
Great first segment, guys.
Great.
Yeah.
We knew
that
you'd
was
be
fabulous.
great.
Thank
I mean,
you.
we
Yeah.
know.